this isn't confirmed. What will be important is to look at clinical data as large numbers of people are, investigated through hospital and also out of hospital, what happens to people out of hospital, but also what happens in the light of the vaccination programme.
The wider picture here, and obviously you're now talking to an international audience, is that however you measure how different countries have performed over the last year, the UK comes out of almost any of those measurements pretty badly. Why do you think that is?
Well, there's a varied picture from the UK. I presume you're describing deaths here. It may be other descriptions on your mind, but I would answer this in the light of deaths. Is that the question?
96,000 now. Yes, that's what was lying behind my question.
Yes. So this is profoundly sad, and it's a consequence of very vibrant transmission of the virus in this country. So we have had several waves of severe transmission throughout the country. There are many reasons why people think that the death rate is higher here. That is a matter of investigation. And it's very early in this pandemic to say that as well. There are several reasons why it might be. We need to compare like with like. So the way deaths are measured, or measured at all, is important as well. It is a matter of profound concern and is a matter of investigation, but I think we need to look at this over the whole range of the pandemic, which is far from over.
Yvonne Doyle, appreciate you coming on. Thank you very much. It's 19 minutes past 8 GMT. Now, this has been an eventful week in the United States, I think it's fair to say. After 4 turbulent years under Donald Trump, Joe Biden was inaugurated as the 46th president on Wednesday. History was made with Vice President Kamala Harris, the first female and first black and Asian American person to serve in that role. Well, the BBC's Razia Iqbal was in Washington and reflects on the past week in this essay that she recorded for this programme.
January in Washington looked and felt to me like any time of year in Pakistan without the heat. The cold shudder of seeing thousands of troops standing by their trucks at every roadblock from the airport to the centre was not unexpected, but the reality of it was chilling. And that's because the centre, that city on a shining hill, a beacon of democracy and hope, was shown to be fragile and more frail than we once thought after the storming of the Capitol building on January the 6th. And serious muscle was brought in to protect it. Walking the eerily empty streets of DC, devoid of the usual hubbub of a city, was filled with foreboding. While our encounters with the men and women in combat fatigues were solicitous, we knew they were there because of the potential for more violence. The spectre that it might come from within their ranks led to thousands being vetted and a few being removed. More chilling and shuddering. Their oversized presence, more of them here than in Afghanistan and Iraq combined, prompted these bon mots from a colleague and old US hand, Baghdad on the Potomac. And that, in and of itself, made this a transfer of power like no other. It was already going to be different, unusual, full of firsts. The pandemic made sure of that. And then the dark pall of 2 successive Wednesdays in January. An insurrection, and the following week, a second and historic impeachment. On the 3rd Wednesday, the pressure to forcefully reassert a peaceful transfer of power, a cornerstone of this republic, was immense. The Americans are very good at symbols, and the decision to plant nearly 200,000 flags along the National Mall, substituting the crowds that couldn't be there, was a stroke of genius. Their gentle fluttering in cold winds, suggesting warm nods of approval. And of course, they embody a United States of America, a symbol that feels critical to the man taking the reins of power over a quite clearly disunited States of America. To those among the 75 million who voted for Donald Trump and who believe the lie he fed them that the election was stolen, January the 20th was perhaps a day they couldn't celebrate, for all the calls for unity. Joe Biden gave an inaugural address that some thought folksy, full of homespun wisdom. It struck me, though, as a powerful reminder of America's civic faith. He asked what defines Americans and answered thus: opportunity, security, liberty, dignity, respect, honour, and yes, the truth. That last word has been so disrespected, dishonoured and distorted for 4 years that it felt fresh to hear it as a commitment. And the freshness of firsts was in abundance, from the youngest senator to the oldest president, the first woman vice president, and a woman of mixed heritage too. How every woman's heart must soar at this, and yet also lament that she is the first in 243 years. At 22, the youngest poet to read. In The Hill We Climb, Amanda Gorman articulated the promise of democracy. And for all her popular influences, Hamilton, music from The Crown, the film Lincoln, what she reminded me of was that other great American poet, Langston Hughes, and his poem, "Oh, let America be America again, the land that never has been yet, and yet must be."
Razia Iqbal, and as she hinted, she spoke to Amanda Gorman, who for many did steal the show on Wednesday. Here's an excerpt from the interview in which she told Razia that the riots at the Capitol building on the 6th of January inspired her to complete her poem.
January the 6th was the day in which I finished the poem. I was, as I mentioned, chugging along and feeling very slow in my progress, and then the news broke, and it was just this moment that underscored for me the importance of getting the poem done, writing the poem with heart and hope and love on the brain. And so I finished the rest of the poem that day. I don't want to say that it completely upended the work, because I was not necessarily, I would say, surprised by what happened. So it wasn't as if it completely changed my worldview, but it just energized, I think, the execution of said work.
A little bit more poetry from Amanda Gorman before the end of the programme, but let's have some final reflections. Simon Robinson, I don't doubt you were glued to events in Washington on Wednesday. What are your thoughts now?
I think we all have been, and pretty much all month. The US is such an incredible, I think for many people around the world, a confounding and puzzling and inspiring place all at once. And I think the events of January 6th, when we saw the attack on the Capitol, and then this week the inauguration, and a very different tone, and all of that is America. And I think we've heard a few times this month, well, this doesn't represent America. I think that everything we've seen, it makes it the kind of incredible power that it is. So yeah, watching on with great interest, and very, very interested to see how this administration will work out.
Jacqueline, how do those sentiments compare with yours?
Well, we are at a monumental point in history. It will take time to reflect exactly what's happened in the last week or so, and how it's transformed the world's view of America and where America sits. I mean, the opportunity now for the United States and the Biden administration to reset not just their domestic politics, but to reinvigorate the global world order is profound, really. And we won't know how successful that will be until we have some time to assess it. But I really do believe that we are at a very crucial time where you have the rise of China, you have how different countries are handling the coronavirus pandemic, the unequal rollout of the vaccine, the uncertainties that are going on in the world now that have created so much uncertainty and confusion and anxiety for not only people but populations and countries, how they deal with major issues that some might have been small irritating issues that are now being magnified. And so we need time to look at this, but what a time to be looking at America now.
And the global response to climate change as well. I mean, I think there's been a sense where many countries, including China and also the European Union, have made big strides in the last few years. But obviously, Trump came in and announced that the US would withdraw from the Paris agreement. Now Biden has, I think, on his first day reversed that.
He did.
The global response to climate change will help define this century and beyond. And the American participation in that is crucial.
You've rounded the conversation off very nicely, both of you. Thank you both very much indeed for being a part of the programme today. I think it's a first for this programme to have two Australians on the panel, so celebrate that first, both of you. Jacqueline Magnay, Simon Robinson with me throughout. The programme back, of course, at the same time tomorrow. Join me then if you can. We're going to end with Amanda Gorman herself reading an excerpt from that poem for the BBC.
We've seen a force that would shatter our nation rather than share it, would destroy our country if it meant delaying democracy. And this effort very nearly succeeded. But while democracy can be periodically delayed, it can never be permanently defeated. In this truth, in this faith, we trust. For while we have our eyes on the future, history has its eyes on us.
This is the BBC World Service. Now here's something to think about.
When someone has a brilliant idea, it's a light bulb moment. But then they have to prove their theory.
We have conducted experiments in many so-called small-scale societies, from the Peruvian jungle to Pacific Islands.
I'm David Edmonds, and in The Big Idea, I'll be examining new research on human reason and rationality.
And what we found was that the more people elaborated, the more they also changed their views.
When you ask people who have recently married whether their marriage will end up in divorce, they normally say close to zero, even when the divorce rates are close to 50%.
Men tip 23% more than women tip.
I found some of the most fascinating ideas around and the people who thought them up.
The Big Idea at bbcworldservice.com/documentaries.
It's all change at the White House, with the new president promising to unite the country.
And making pledges on a host of key issues: COVID, racism, climate change, and the economy.
I'm Katty Kay of the BBC World Service.
And I'm Carlos Watson of Aussie Media.
And today we're joined by two veterans of past US administrations to discuss what lies ahead for America.
Join us for When Katty Met Carlos after the news.
BBC News with Gareth Barlow. A day of rallies by supporters of the jailed opposition leader Alexei Navalny has begun in cities across Russia. The first took part in Russia's Far East, and dozens have already been detained. Mr. Navalny returned to Moscow from Germany last Sunday, 5 months after being poisoned by a deadly nerve agent. Residents in Wuhan have been marking the first anniversary of the coronavirus lockdown, which saw the Chinese city sealed off for more than 2 months. Wuhan is now bustling with activity again, but there are no celebrations. A team from the World Health Organization is there to investigate the origins of the virus. The British Medical Association has expressed deep concern over the government-approved interval of up to 12 weeks between the first and second doses of the Pfizer-BioNTech coronavirus vaccine. The doctors urged a shorter interval to ensure people get maximum protection. President Biden has held his first conversations with world leaders since taking office. The calls with Canada's Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and Mexico's President Andrés Manuel López Obrador have been described as positive. The Afghan government has welcomed the US decision to review an agreement reached by the Trump administration and the Taliban. One Afghan minister said the Islamists had failed to live up to their commitments, and the deal had failed to meet its goal of ending the violence. Juan Guzman Tapia, the judge who led the first prosecution of former Chilean dictator General Augusto Pinochet, has died aged 81. He investigated the killing of political prisoners following the coup that brought Pinochet to power. And Sri Lanka's Health Minister Pravitra Monirachi has tested positive for COVID-19 after publicly consuming a so-called miracle potion which was meant to offer protection. The potion was made by a Sri Lankan shaman who claimed the recipe came to him in a vision. BBC News.
Hello, I'm Katty Kay in Washington.
And I'm Carlos Watson in California.
and welcome to When Catty Met Carlos,
a new show that looks at the ways the U.S. is reshaping its future, brought to you by the BBC World Service and Aussie Media. Catty, wow, what a week it has been. President Biden's in the White House, and from this side of the country, it seems as though the inauguration went off smoothly.
I think so, Carlos. I mean, I started the day on Inauguration Day on Wednesday feeling rather sad, actually. I had to wade through security to get to my live position, which is so unusual. And this city really has been on lockdown for the last few days, so it all felt slightly dispiriting. But then by the end of the day, I felt they had really managed in extraordinary circumstances, and it was so difficult with COVID and the security to actually pull off something that did feel like a celebration of democracy and a peaceful transfer of power. And, you know, all kudos to everybody up on Capitol Hill, Republican and Democrat, for managing 2 weeks after that attack to get just the building back in shape and looking great and put this whole show on. It was not a sure thing, was it, 2 weeks ago? But I think they did it.
You know, they really did a nice job. And when we say they, as you were saying, not only Biden and Harris, but Republican members of Congress like Mitch McConnell and others I thought were important. And then even some of the pop culture figures. I think about people like Jennifer Lopez and Lady Gaga, or even maybe more importantly, the young poet. A great outfit indeed. Well, a number of people showed up and showed out, as they say, from Michelle Obama to others. A lot of folks, I think, stood out. I hadn't
heard that expression. I think I was on air and Lady Gaga came on and I said, perhaps unwisely on a national broadcast, I feel like I need to upgrade my outfit right now because I was being massively upstaged. From beginning to end, it was a good, colourful display. And it had that sense of symbolism that is so important about the transition from one administration to another, even though Donald Trump wasn't there. You know, it felt like the baton was being passed because Mike Pence showed up and did the gracious thing, and the baton was passed from one administration that had been defeated to another that had won, and that is as it should be in American democracy.
So, have a good life. We will see you soon. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
And so we lift our gazes not to what stands between us, but what stands before us. We close the divide because we know to put our future first. We must first put our differences aside. We lay down our arms so we can reach out our arms to one another. We seek harm to none and harmony for all. Let the globe, if nothing else, say this is true.
I, Kamala Davy Harris, do solemnly swear.
I, Kamala Davy Harris, do solemnly swear.
I, Joseph Robinette Biden Jr., do solemnly swear. We've learned again that democracy is precious. Democracy is fragile. And at this hour, my friends, democracy has prevailed.
So, the celebration is now over. The honeymoon was very short, and the real work has already begun. And what an enormous in-tray the new Biden administration has. We're going to devote this program to the challenges that he faces at home in America and abroad. How will President Biden and Vice President Harris deal with the coronavirus pandemic, the economy, racism, climate change, international threats? And to do that, we are joined by two veterans of two different Democratic administrations. Valerie Jarrett was a senior advisor to President Barack Obama, and she will join us later in the program. But we start with John McLaughlin, who served as deputy director of the CIA under Bill Clinton. He has 30 years under his belt in the intelligence community in the United States and is the perfect person to guide us to what President Biden has to look to abroad. Welcome, Mr. McLaughlin. I wanted to talk to you about From a security point of view, watching the inauguration, how nervous were you?
I was quite nervous going into it, Katty. I think everyone was. When you consider, as many have remarked, that we had more troops in Washington yesterday than we have in Afghanistan and Iraq combined. That was perhaps excessive in a way, but that's probably what you need to do when you are not sure and when you've had what amounts to an intelligence failure in the case of the insurrection at the Capitol. So I think we as a nation, and particularly given the thinned out nature of our security agencies in the last days of the Trump administration, I don't think we had yet a very good idea of the extent of this threat. That will be one of the first things that the Biden administration has to really burrow in on and figure out how serious and prolonged this is. And I think they will.
John, if you were back in your old job and briefing a new president, as you did with then President-elect Bill Clinton, and I know you've done for several other presidents as well, what would be top on your agenda in terms of briefing the new commander-in-chief?
Right now, I would say the two things that are pressing, that with a time fuse on them are, perhaps not a good metaphor, are both nuclear in nature. In the case of Strategic Arms Limitation Treaty signed by Obama in 2011, it expires within 2 weeks. That's the only forum we have for negotiating and managing the two nuclear forces of Russia and the United States, the world's superpowers in nuclear weapons. So he's got to quickly figure out a way to buy some time on that. It can be done with a signature, but I don't know that that's all been worked out with Putin yet. And then he'll have a longer negotiation. And the second one is Iran, which has begun, as Katty and many others have reported, reinstituting its nuclear program after Trump pulled out of that agreement. It's not an irreversible situation with Iran, but the clock is ticking again. Iran has a presidential election in less than 6 months, and in all likelihood, a hardliner will come to the fore, replacing President Rouhani, who is, in Iranian terms, a more pragmatic individual. So the clock is ticking on that one, and a lot of things have changed since the agreement was signed back in 2015. Including a more united and robust region that wants a seat at the table. The UAE, Israel, Bahrain, and probably the Saudis as well. So it'll be complicated.
Can I ask you a 50,000-foot question? When President Trump came into office and stood up there in the inauguration in 2017 and spoke about America first, it was clear that he was going to have a more nationalist focus to his engagement with the world. And at that moment, a lot of us who kind of watch power shifts in the world thought, well, if America is going to retreat over the next 4 years, power loves a vacuum and somebody will step in and take some of America's role. With the benefit now of 4 years, how much has shifted in the global power balance? Behind the scenes, kind of quietly, did America lose some of its global supremacy and footprint because of a retrenchment by the Trump administration?
Absolutely, Katty. Just look at the China situation. Their economy and purchasing power parity is already larger than ours, not quite in nominal terms yet. When Trump pulled out of the Trans-Pacific Partnership, that trade relationship with 11 other countries, mostly in Asia, the Chinese were not in it, but they immediately focused their attention on a competing agreement, the Regional Comprehensive Economic Program, which encompasses about a third of humanity, and they are now the major country in that. They've created the Infrastructure Investment Bank in Asia. They have their Belt and Road Initiative, which is a series of agreements on sea and land and air between China and all the way through the Middle East and Europe. So yes, I mean, there's no question that China has moved partly into the vacuum that was created when Trump stepped back from so many things, including the Paris Climate Accord, which Biden is now rejoining. Now, there's a limitation on that. I don't think China's very good at what we would call values-based alliances, like NATO, for example. No one really wants to be in an alliance with China, but they are caught up in China's power orbit, their economic orbit. And China's very good at pulling people together under basically economic agreements that are interlocking and that tie people to China. So, yes, Biden has an uphill battle here to regain some of our influence in the world that has slipped away. No question about that.
John, can we circle back to end this conversation back to Inauguration Day? And there wasn't much in Joe Biden's inaugural address, his 20-odd minutes of his speech, that talked to the rest of the world. But at one point, he did say that America was ready. He promised to, the quote was, repair our alliances and engage with the world once again. There is a trust deficit amongst America's allies, having watched the Trump administration and seen how America can elect a president like President Trump who retreats and enacts a nationalist policy. And some of America's allies are saying, yeah, it's great. We're so happy to hear that. We know two things. One, that Joe Biden is going to have an enormous domestic agenda that will take up an awful lot of his bandwidth, and we're not sure he's going to have the time to re-engage with the rest of the world. And a kind of, they don't say it out loud, but I hear diplomatic leaders in Washington say this to me, look, America did this once, perhaps they will do it again. How does Joe Biden go about reassuring his allies on both those fronts in specific terms?
I do think you are right. There is a trust deficit. We did such an extraordinary thing in electing Trump. And certainly I think most people would not be sure that we wouldn't do this again. The only way I can see that Biden can reassure the world that that is not the case is to deal internally here in the United States with the kinds of things, insofar as we understand them, that led to the emergence, the Trump phenomenon. And in a way, people have said Trump did us kind of a favor by showing that there is a huge proportion of the American population that either has not participated and benefited from all the prosperity of America, and, maybe more important, does not accept fact as fact without challenge. And so I think he has to address those issues. He has to do two things. He has to ensure through his policies that people see in the United States that there is a more equitable system of dividing up this great prosperity we have. And second, he has to be very honest with the population and gradually bring people to an understanding that you can believe what the President of the United States says. In a way, I think this is the greatest damage that Trump did, is taking us to a point where you could not believe what the President of the United States said. So he's got to reestablish that. The proof will probably be in public opinion surveys that show after a year or two what the United States thinks of Biden and his approach, his administration, his policies. If the rest of the world sees that that's all working, maybe they will not hold their breaths with such anxiety, but it's going to be understandable that they do for a while.
John McLaughlin, former Deputy Director of the CIA, pleasure to have you. And now joining us on the show is former senior advisor to President Obama and one of his longest-serving aides and confidants, Valerie Jarrett. Valerie, good to be with you.
Well, it's a pleasure to be with you as well.
You know, Valerie, we just had a conversation with the former Deputy Director of the CIA, John McLaughlin, where he said that in order to keep America safe abroad, we had to make sure that America was safe at home. And he talked about the breach of the Capitol. He talked about the challenges in terms of facts and truth and people being able to believe the President of the United States. How worried are you, not only just about polarization, but about some of the other manifestations that we've seen over the last year and over the last 4 years in terms of people believing facts, people participating in the democratic process in a positive and constructive way? How do you think about that?
Well, I'm profoundly worried. I think that our country has been torn apart over the last 4 years, and I do believe the tone starts at the top. And I think on everything from facts about the COVID virus and the steps that we could take to contain it. And it's appalling that the United States has the astronomical death rate that we have, given our access to medicine and science. And a lot of it is just simply messages that were not clear from the beginning, which is why it was so important that President Biden signaled immediately that where the federal government has jurisdictions, masks are going to be required. It's just a simple evidence-based step we could all take to keep ourselves healthy. The insurrection that we saw trying to disrupt the orderly business of Congress 2 weeks ago was really a manifestation of an anger that has been fueled over the last 4 years, and frankly, longer than the last 4 years. This sense that there are, as opposed to being just facts, that there is editorial and there's entertainment and this veering away and people receiving information on demand as opposed to reliable sources of news, the way the news was when I grew up. And I think what you are going to see from the President of the United States, but is a responsibility of everyone, not just in the United States, but around the world, is to try to listen without, or even disagree without being disagreeable, to hear perspectives that are other than our own, to try to find each other's better angels and show our own. And I think that that's a very important tone to have coming from the White House, but I think it has to happen at kitchen tables all around our country as well. We have a lot of healing to do. It's nothing that's going to happen because of one day celebration.
Valerie, it was pretty clear quite quickly that not everybody felt the same. Joe Biden's inaugural address was all about unity. He mentioned unity or unification at least 10 times. Within 24 hours of that address, you already had Republican senators like Rand Paul pushing back on what unity actually means, saying that actually Joe Biden was using his inaugural address to attack all Republicans, to equate all Republicans with white supremacy. If that is the reaction that quickly, clearly there's not going to be a honeymoon for Joe Biden, but it also gets to this fundamental tension in the country between unity and what unity means and accountability. And how do you get to unity without making some people feel that there has not been accountability, that perhaps, the sins of the past, and I'm not just talking about the attack on the Capitol, but police brutality to African Americans, the unequal condition of African Americans and Latinx people in this country, that those have been kind of swept under the carpet. And it seems to me there is a conflict there that Joe Biden is going to have to deal with.
Well, I'd say a few things. First of all, I don't think there's any attempt to sweep anything under the carpet. And one of the many things I respect about Joe Biden is his honesty and his willingness to be direct on the issue of racial equity. He is creating a new initiative, focusing on that, putting it under the responsibility of Susan Rice, who's the new head of the Domestic Policy Council. He will confront that issue head on, and as he has historically, in a very open and transparent way. As for Senator Rand Paul, I hope he will be an outlier. And there are always going to be outliers. But the fact that Leader McConnell, with whom the vice president has had, now the president, I've got to call him the president now. It's so good to say that.
It always takes a few days.
It does take a few days. With whom he has had a long and collegial working relationship, who worshiped with him that morning, who showed up at the inauguration, who stood up on the position of supporting democracy against a mob that tried to mount an insurrection. So I continue to believe that the majority of the people in our country are of good intent. And it doesn't mean it's not going to be a bumpy road. It is going to be a bumpy road. And I think the president is fully aware of that. The vice president is fully aware of that. But you have to start somewhere. And there was nothing in anything he said that supports the position that Senator Paul made about all Republicans being white supremacists. And I think we have to call that out when we see it. We can't let outrageous statements go unchecked. And I think so often people who are logical go, well, nobody would believe that. And so you don't counter it. And that's not the case. A lot of good people do believe when they're fed lies over and over again, they believe they're true. And that's the case with even the outcome of the election, which led to the insurrection that we saw. And many of the people who spoke out in challenging the outcome of the election after the insurrection changed their vote, recognizing they'd gone too far. And so I think cooler heads will prevail under better leadership. But it will take time and it will take effort. And you can't brush anything under the rug. You have to be willing to put the spotlight on it and let it shine in the daylight.
Valerie, like President Obama, President Biden comes in with majorities in the House, a narrow majority in the Senate. And on one level, that looks like exactly what you'd like as a new leader, an opportunity really to bring alive some of the policy that you think is important and urgent. But on the other side, is there a real risk of near-term conflict within the Democratic Party? Could you see progressives like AOC and others want to go at a different tempo or maybe a different set of priorities versus President Biden? How real is that risk, do you think?
I think it is a risk. Look, when President Obama came in, we had control of the House and the Senate and still had a tough time getting legislation through. So it's important that the focus not simply be on reaching to the other side of the aisle, but to really coalesce the Democratic side of the aisle, too. Something I would mention that President Biden did in an extraordinary way during the course of his campaign. He managed to get every single candidate who was running against him to not only endorse him, but to work hard on his behalf. That did not happen in 2016. And so he is quite skilled at building coalitions, at keeping people feeling inside of the tent, at listening. And I do think our country is in a different place in time right now, where people have constituents or family members who have fallen victim to this illness, either by being ill themselves or by taking care of relatives or trying to take care of relatives, not being able to be present when people are in the hospital, seeing the job loss and the people who are struggling, who are essential workers. This pandemic has ravaged every part of our country, and it didn't start out that way. And I'm in New York right now. New York was, ground zero. And a lot of the country just kind of ignored what was going on because it wasn't happening in their neighborhood. But now it is, unfortunately. And so I think that presents a sense of urgency for the members of Congress to stay focused as well, on both sides of the aisle.
Valerie Jarrett, thank you very much for giving us your time this week.
You're welcome. Take care.
So, Carlos, a lot of challenges and not much honeymoon time.
No, but, as you said before, what a level of experience he brings to this. Probably there's a level of comfort that he has. I'm not sure anyone has perfect comfort stepping in the Oval Office, but if ever there was someone who probably has some level of comfort around it, I bet it's Joe Biden.
Yeah, they've come into office and I think they've all had a bit of a wake-up call, particularly on the pandemic front, realizing that there really was not a plan for vaccine distribution, and perhaps the task in front of them is even bigger than they thought it was even a month or so ago. But I do think what Valerie said there at the end might be interesting and perhaps hopeful, which is it is possible that Republicans realize things have to get done, and that maybe there is going to be less obstructionism from the Republican side than there was under President Obama, because there is, for everybody, this mutual enemy. It's not the Cold War, but we have a national enemy out there, which is the pandemic. And that can concentrate minds and perhaps make people want to work together a bit more.
I do think you're right. I think we will see a level of what Democratic Congresswoman Maxine Waters said to me yesterday. She called it pragmatic patience. And she said to me, Carlos, I'm going to be more patient with President Biden than I normally would be. And she said, I'm going to constantly give him the benefit of the doubt. And where there are areas where I might be tempted to say he's not being progressive enough, I'm going to hold back and lean into his space. And I suspect that there will be that kind of honeymoon for Joe Biden, not only on his left flank within his party, but as you said, on the moderate right. And so some of the Republican senators, like Mitch McConnell, who's not normally called a moderate, but the Senate leader on the Republican side, and Mitt Romney and others, Susan Collins, Lisa Murkowski. I think the president will get some warm help and warm reception as he tackles COVID. and our economic challenges.
Yeah, I mean, after living in Washington for as many years as I have, I am always skeptical when people talk about the prospect of unity in this city. Disunity seems to be Washington's business. But let's be hopeful that in this moment of crisis, the new president's call for unity not just as an end, but unity as a means, as a tool, as a weapon for getting things done will be heeded, because nobody wants this pandemic to last longer than it has to.
It will be. You know, as we close out, I have to tell you, even better than any speech by the new president or any member of Congress, did you see the young woman, Amanda Gorman, the poet, who gave that? I thought she might have stole the show, Caddy. I thought that her words that America is not yet finished, I thought there was something beautiful and hopeful and fresh about that, much as she was.
What's it like to go viral? Millions or even hundreds of millions of people watching and sharing you online. I'm Colin Flynn, meeting some of the internet's biggest and first viral video stars.
My viral video and me at bbcworldservice.com/documentaries. And at 9:50 GMT, it's Over to You with Rajan Datar.
Listeners to a recent edition of Weekend ask if a discussion on football that appeared to link hugging and kissing during goal celebrations to a player's sexuality was appropriate. Plus, we discover how COVID has affected the BBC's digital teams.
This is the BBC World Service, the world's radio station.
Hello, I'm Nuala McGovern on the BBC World Service, and this is BBC OS Conversations. President Biden, call for unity. We hear from Americans across the country as Joe Biden begins a new presidency. Two evangelical Christians discuss nationalism and conspiracy theories. Plus, a Republican couple in Nevada share how they feel about plans to heal political divisions.
I have been made to feel like, I'm the crazy one. I'm the loony for voting for Trump or for being on this side of the table. If people can be kind now with this transition, if the Democrats can be kind towards the Republicans, then that would go a long way in me feeling like I mattered.
We also hear from Black Lives Matter supporters in Kentucky and North Carolina about the challenges ahead for racial justice, all after the latest BBC News.
BBC News, hello, I'm Gareth Barlow. Russian police have detained dozens of protesters at the beginning of a wave of demonstrations in support of the jailed opposition leader Alexei Navalny. From Moscow, Steve Rosenberg.
The Russian authorities have warned that all protests today in support of Alexei Navalny will be considered illegal. In the Russian Far East, police have already been breaking up unsanctioned rallies and detaining protesters. In an effort to prevent large demonstrations, in recent days, police across Russia have detained key allies of the Kremlin critic. And social media networks have been instructed to remove content that has been encouraging children to take part in the protests. In a message from jail, posted online, Mr. Navalny addressed concerns that behind bars, his life, that if something did happen to him, it wouldn't be suicide. I'm in a stable, psychological and emotional state, he wrote.
Residents in Wuhan have been marking the first anniversary of the coronavirus lockdown, which saw the Chinese city sealed off for more than 2 months. Many outside China were shocked by the restrictions. Here's Stephen McDonald.
The authorities have been criticised for the slow response at the beginning, even punishing whistleblowers trying to send a warning in early January. But soon the government was flying in plane loads of extra military medics and building huge temporary isolation facilities to ease the load for local hospitals, which were flooded with the sick and dying. In recent times, China seems to have worked out a way to control the outbreaks as they come, with strict localised lockdowns, contact tracing apps and mass testing.
Hong Kong has implemented its first full lockdown to halt the spread of a coronavirus outbreak in the south of the Kowloon Peninsula. From dawn, 10,000 people in the neighbourhood of Jordan have been ordered to stay home for 2 days. The Health Secretary said the risk of infection in the densely populated area was high. The government plans to test every resident and process the results within 48 hours. The British Medical Association has expressed deep concern at the government's current policy of allowing an interval of up to 12 weeks between the first and second doses of the Pfizer-BioNTech coronavirus vaccine. Dr. Chand Nagpal is the BMA chairman.
No other nation has adopted the UK's approach. We think that the flexibility that the World Health Organization offers to 42 days is being stretched far too much to go from 6 weeks right through to 12 weeks. The Chief Medical Association and those across the 4 nations believe that this is still going to provide protection based on an extrapolation of data. We don't have that data, and there have been growing concerns about how effective the vaccine really will be continuing from 6 to 12 weeks.
World News from the BBC. European countries are introducing further restrictions to combat the spread of new coronavirus variants, especially the one which emerged in Britain, which is more contagious and possibly more lethal than earlier strains. Norway is introducing its strictest lockdown so far in the capital region, including the closure of all non-essential shops. The first nighttime curfew in the Netherlands will come into force at 9 p.m. local time. Sri Lanka's Health Minister Pavitra Waniarachi has tested positive for the coronavirus weeks after publicly consuming a so-called miracle potion, which was meant to offer lifelong protection. More from Jill McGivering.
The Sri Lankan shaman who invented the potion said the recipe was given to him in a visionary dream. He claims the magical formula, which includes honey and nutmeg, offers lifelong immunity from the coronavirus and also cures it. There was criticism when government officials, including Ms. Waniarachi, appeared on television, taking the potion and appearing to endorse it. Hundreds of bottles have since been sold. Sri Lanka is battling a second wave of new infections. It's just approved the vaccine developed by AstraZeneca and Oxford and expects to receive the first doses in a few days.
Democratic leaders in the US Congress say the articles of impeachment against Donald Trump will be delivered to the Senate on Monday. However, the Senate Majority Leader, Chuck Schumer, has said the trial will not begin in earnest until the second week of February. The leader of the Republican minority, Mitch McConnell, had asked for a delay to allow the defense time to prepare. And the Afghan government has welcomed the US decision to review the agreement reached by the Trump administration and the Taliban, with one minister saying the Islamists had failed to live up to their commitments. A deputy interior minister said the agreement, which offered US troop withdrawals in return for security guarantees, had also failed to meet its goal of ending the violence. BBC News.
Hello, I'm Nuala McGovern on the BBC World Service, and this is BBC OS Conversations. President Biden, call for unity. The new president has urged the people of the United States to unite, but he has a tough job ahead, especially among Republican voters.
I'm sure in his heart of hearts he thinks that half the country, the 73 million people who voted for Trump, are somehow subhuman. But if he cannot let that get out, if he can at least control himself, because then it won't inflame people so badly.
The 46th President of the United States, Joseph R. Biden, Jr.
Joe Biden inherits his presidency at a time of crisis in the United States. Record deaths from coronavirus, millions of job losses as a result of the ongoing pandemic, and deep divisions across the country. Not surprisingly, his inauguration speech attempted to reach out to all Americans.
With unity, we can do great things, important things. We can right wrongs. We can put people to work in good jobs. We can teach our children in safe schools. We can overcome the deadly virus.
President Biden is a man of faith, a practicing Catholic in a country where religion plays a significant role. From the controversy of the presidential election, one conversation in the United States is over the ongoing support of former President Donald Trump by a large number of white evangelicals. Evangelical Christians, they take the Bible's words as the highest form of authority, and white evangelicals make up almost 20% of the US electorate. According to exit polls, 4 out of 5 of them voted for Trump in the last election. Some have also pointed to the presence of evangelicals on Capitol Hill at the beginning of January as crowds gathered to show their support for Donald Trump. What followed that day, of course, was the storming of the building as a mob tried to prevent Joe Biden from becoming president. 5 people died. Sarah Billups is a faith and culture writer and deacon at a Presbyterian church in Seattle. And Stephanie Renade Creeder is in Columbus, Ohio, which is one of those places often referred to as God's country. She's a public policy professional, a lay leader in an evangelical church, and co-host of the podcast. So what do we have? Both women are evangelical Christians, and Stephanie began our conversation by explaining what she sees as the development and threats of Christian nationalism within their faith.
Christian nationalism is sort of this blended faith where people, have this very Christian belief, and yet it's somehow very closely tied to faith in our country. Markers of Christian nationalism, I've come to know now, are things like, inside of your church having an American flag and also having something called the Christian flag. I've heard so many stories from friends, especially recently, about growing up and attending church youth events where they would pledge allegiance to the American flag and then pledge allegiance to the Christian flag in that order. And so it's very interesting that so much of American evangelicalism is tied up in this concept of loving your country, America being a Christian nation, this moral foundation for government. Those things are not biblical.